For starters, I am not Dr. Acquah. I'm George Felix Acquah, Mr. I am still doing my PhD. I'm not done. So the first thing is I'm Mr. Acquah. Okay. And thank you very much for the opportunity. So if I may share my screen now.
Please.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope it's okay now.
Yes, it looks good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Let me use this opportunity to wish everyone on this call a happy International Medical Physicists Week, especially to all medical physicists who are joining us from the continent of Africa. And I am very grateful to the executive of FAMPO, to my co-presenter, Professor Chris and Professor Hasford, for such an opportunity to present this, and also to thank the International Organization of Medical Physicists for such a wonderful webinar. So my name is George Felix Acquah, and I work with the International Blantyre Cancer Center in Malawi as their head physicist, and I'll be presenting today, the third day of this webinar, on introducing radiotherapy in Africa through network collaboration from the medical physicist perspective and my experiences in Togo and Malawi. So I will just the existing collaborations on the African continent and a discussion or a talk on my experiences in Togo and that of Malawi, how we were able to introduce radiotherapy into these two countries. So from here, we can see that there are many challenges that hinder the delivery of radiotherapy in lower middle income countries, especially on the continent of Africa. So from the figure 1, you can see that inadequate cancer incident planning, if we don't have a national control program as a country, education and training of personnel is very key for you to have a very successful radiotherapy service in the country. If you have a regional specialized resource center who take part in research and clinical trials, trying to harmonize or standardize the practice of the country or the sub-region, it's also key. Then the appropriate radiotherapy infrastructure, the QA, the national regulator who regulates the activities of these radiotherapy facilities. And finally, if you have a very good partnership or collaboration, that's what I will be focusing on today. So these are very familiar figures we are all used to, and this is from the GlobalCan 2020 database. And you can see the new cases worldwide and the number of deaths and that of Africa. So in Africa, in as much as the developing country, there is a rising number of cancer cases and cancer-related deaths. And from GlobalCan, you can see that from the period 2020 to 2023, it is estimated that the number of new cases will rise to 24 million globally. And out of these, approximately 75% of them will occur in mortalities in developing countries. And by 2030, Africa incidence of cancer will be increased by 70%. So it means that without any intervention in place, Africa faces nearly 1 million cancer deaths yearly from cancer. So this is a very worrying situation. It means that something should be done, especially by all medical physicists and people on the African continent. And this is also from the IEA Directory of Radiotherapy Centers, the DIRAC. So in as much as you want to treat the radiotherapy cancer, at a point in time, you will need radiotherapy, which is a very vital and effective way of treating and managing cancer. So from the graph from DIRAC, these are data that I had from DIRAC, you can see the distribution of equipment in the world. In Africa, we have 531 with the least number of radiotherapy equipment as compared to other UN regions, according to the DIRA. So you can say many countries in Africa, they still lack radiotherapy as part of treating cancer. It may be due to the high cost of operating and maintaining these machines. Most of centers in Africa used to have machines operating for a number of years, and because of lack of maintenance, these machines break down and never come back working again. And also the decision whether to go in for a cobalt machine or to use Linux is a long-standing debate, which is still ongoing, whether Africa will still want to stick to the cobalt due to power issues and maintenance and its robustness, or just to also move to the application or the use of Linux. And we also lack resources, both human and equipment-wise. So these are some of the challenges we are facing in our African settings here. And you can also see, this is another figure showing radiotherapy centers in the world. So you can see that most of the radiotherapy centers in Africa are situated in the northern and southern part of Africa. And if you look at the other parts of Africa, especially the middle and the sub-Saharan Africa, only few countries tend to have radiotherapy facilities on centers. So this data I had just last month, you realize that out of the 54 countries in Africa, only 34 have any form of radiotherapy in terms of external beam, and 20 have brachytherapy capacity. And more so, there's a lot of disparity in terms of this distribution of equipment in the African continent. 80% of them are housed, as I said, in the northern and southern Africa. Egypt and South Africa alone have over 50% of all equipment on the African continent. So we need to bridge that disparity gap in terms of access of radiotherapy equipment. And IEA and DIRAC database, there was a projection made on the global cancer incidence for 84 lower middle income countries. And they realized that the deficit of machines, 61% for that 84 countries to catch up with the number of equipment per population as required by the World Health Organization, IEA. The deficit was 61.4%. And from the labor force, radiation oncologists, 38, medical physicists, 68.4, and radio RTT, 66. So the shortage in terms of human skills, it's really telling, especially when it comes to medical physicists in Africa. The human resources are very low. We don't have a lot of well-trained medical physicists who are able to manage or to run radiotherapy facilities. And there's also an incident of brain drain, because most of medical physicists who are sent outside for training, some of them find it difficult to come back because the knowledge and expertise that they've acquired after the training, they find difficult to implement when they come back to their region or countries, and they don't find such machines or such technique there. So they are always going back to where they train. And additionally, there's a significant technological gap in terms of trying to match up with what is done in the other country. And when in terms of enhanced regional and international collaboration, Africa, for a very long time, we realized that we need such collaborations and network for us to be able to have adequate training as well. So we will try to identify collaborations, be it national. Once these collaborations are done, it will help us to benefit from the radiotherapy combination and for our patients. So everything that we do, the final beneficiary is the patients that we treat in Africa. It's not about the different centers, but we are trying to give the best treatment to cancer patients on the African continent. So the question is, why do we need collaboration? So from the slides and from the introduction, we realized the incidence of cancer and cancer-related death on the African continent is skyrocketing, is very going according to the projections. And There are several global initiatives that has been launched over the past decade to help address the shortage of machines and staff as well. So this collaboration might include that of government and non-governmental organizations, the partners or the vendors in industry and academia. And there have been a lot of teaching platforms that has been created to promote what we call e-learning platform, because now we realize that with e-learning, a lot of medical physicists on the continent will be able to have a bit of training from this platform, or it could be a hybrid model where you begin with the e-learning platform and after there will be an on-site training. So such programs have also really helped. And I think more of such collaboration should be encouraged, because it's really doing a lot of good work for medical physics and radiotherapy on the African continent. So if I look at some of these key collaborations in introducing radiotherapy in Africa, IEA and the World Health Organization has been a very key partner for Africa. So with IEA, they've helped to develop radiation education training in Africa, and they've also supported the training of medical physicists and other personnel in the radiation protection field. They've given funds for people to travel outside to have their training. They've also helped with the funding of equipment and have helped governments with the procurement process. So governments are able to procure machines that are needed for their country and not just go and buy any machine. They've also increased their awareness of radiotherapy cancer or radiotherapy as part of the cancer treatment process. And last but not the least, they've also helped with a lot of technical and expert guidelines. I have a lot of publications and technical documents where most of African countries take their documentation or their guidelines from. And also from the World Health Organization, we can actually also say that they have helped strengthen our national cancer control policies. They tend to work a lot with government institutions or even the Ministry of Health for African countries to help them to strengthen their cancer control programs so that they will know the need of radiotherapy or cancer treatment in their country. They've also provided the cancer database and statistics for countries to be able to know what is on the ground and what the future projections are. So these are some of the key the key collaborators in terms of introduction of radiotherapy in Africa. And there are other partners as well. I think recently, the International Atomic Energy has also come up with a new initiative called the Race of Hope, because they realize that they still need to expand radiotherapy services to some parts of Africa where they don't have any form of radiotherapy at all. So that's also in place. You can also see that there's a lot of virtual universities for cancer control. These are some of the initiatives that I put up here for discussion. IEA with the US government and Roche Africa Research Foundation also have this platform. And in 2025, one vendor with Tyberg Hospital and the Cape Town University of Technology established the training center where radiotherapy or clinical medical physicists and their team will be trained on how to go about the setting of radiotherapy in each country. So this is also a very key partnership when we have vendors trying to meet, especially those from lower middle income countries, to be able to manage their radiotherapy centers. And we also have a lot of international organizations like Estro, AAPM, who have a lot of online educational platform. Africa also have the Africa Oncology Network. We have the Africa Organization of Research and Training. Recently, there's a access to care training program specifically for radiotherapy training, which was being, I think, by Varian and one hospital in South Africa. And when it comes to IOMP and the FAMPO, our local rep, they've also come up with a lot of resources that will help medical physicists who are in radiotherapy to be able to have at least a form of radiotherapy services in their country. ICTP has also helped the international or the medical physicists body themselves. And there are a lot of NGOs who are also trying to help to bridge this gap in Africa. So what this main collaborations and innovative partnership have done is that you can see that in the past 5 years, that's from 2029, all the machines that we have in Africa, close to 26% of them were just installed last 5 years. So it means that all these things are paying dividends, and realize there are a lot of centers coming up in Africa. Africa is now becoming like a hub of radiotherapy in the world. It means that all these things are just they are bearing fruit. And there's also been an increase in academic programs over the last 5 years. If you compare what we had in maybe 10 years ago as compared to now, we have a lot of countries using the FAMPO and IEA recommendation in terms of academic training to come up with training of medical physicists and even going as far as to the PhD level. And when it comes to clinical training, after the academic program, they've also seen the need for medical physicists who want to work in the clinic to have clinical training. And that has also helped. And all these things came from the partnership. Africa, we couldn't have done it ourselves, but we had help from these international partners, and it's really helping. It has also helped to increase human resource on the continent of Africa. So from the medical physics standpoint, when I'm talking about network collaboration, what do I really mean? Or it means that, for a clinical medical physicist, your role specifically when it comes to the introduction of radiotherapy in a facility or your country, it has to do with the equipment selection. It's very important. The design of your radiotherapy bunkers, acceptance tests when the machine is installed, commissioning, which include the calibration of the machine. Then from your commissioning, you come up with your quality assurance program, the measurement of your beam data and analysis as well, the rest, radiation protection, treatment planning, and setting up. So these are very key roles of a medical physicist when it comes to the setting up of radiotherapy. But if you compare with the training of medical physicists on the African continent, most of our academic training spans 2 to 3 years, depending on the country that you are coming from. And after, you might do 6 months to 1 year clinical training. And, you ask yourself, Africa has the least number of countries with machines. Some of them even have old machines which were installed 10 years ago. So then most of the trained medical physicists on the continent are handicapped when it comes to the key areas of setting up radiotherapy, selection, acceptance, and commissioning. So a medical physicist can go through the training, clinical, and all that, but might never, ever witness or involved in any LINAC installation, or has not participated in any commissioning or data measurement. So when such a medical physicist is faced with a possibility or a challenge of trying to set up a radiotherapy department, then they realize that they have the qualification, they have the training, but they have not been involved in such a critical part of setting up a radiotherapy center. So how can you, is a question I'm asking, as a medical physicist who is trained in Africa, be able to kickstart a radiotherapy center when during your training you have never been involved in such a key part or component of setting up a radiotherapy center? So then what we have to do is that we have to be very strategic and deliberate about trying to set up or find out a ratio that will help medical physicists on the African continent to be able to do such duties. So this is a case study from Togo and Malawi. I'm going to give you a review of how radiotherapy was introduced in these two countries through the use of network technology. And specific, it was to be able to build human resource capacity where the staff for the medical physicists will build competent and have a very confident level for them to be doing their work. So for this case, the partnership was a local foreign private partnership. And they established this radiotherapy center in Togo in 2020, and it was operationalized the following year. And they were offering radiotherapy service, the advanced form of radiotherapy service. And it's the same partnership that is currently being replicated in Malawi too, for them to also have their first radiotherapy center. But previously, they've also done similar work in Senegal, where they also partnered with a local private person, and they did similar one, where they partnered with the Ministry of Defense to have a radiotherapy center introduced there in 2018. So now there's also an ongoing project with the same form of collaboration in Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Ethiopia. So within the next years, all 3 projects will be coming up as well. So I will take a brief to explain what this collaboration is and what it entails. So this is the technical document from World Organization about cancer in Togo. It was the 2020 country profile, and it outlined the cancer system capacity and the human resource capacity in the country as of 2020. So you can see from the table that from 2019, the number of CCs in the country, you can see there were about 6, but they didn't have any radiotherapy or external machine. Now it's 2019. And when you look at the cancer management workforce in the country as well, they had 42 surgeons as of 2014. Radiology didn't have medical services wasn't available, additional oncologists wasn't available. So you have yourself success in the country. How are you going to introduce this therapy with such workforce and such system capacity? So what actually happened is that the partners who partnered with the local one have to identify within the Africa or the West African region the resources in terms of human capacity, those who will be able to for them to employ and to train, they give them the requisite training. For those who have a bit of knowledge, they also have upgraded their skills for the clinical practical. So mainly the foreign partners provide what the technical support, ranging from the facility design and construction, the selection and provision of the RTF equipment, from software was very, very critical, because most of this was going to be done based on the network collaboration. So for them to support us and continue to give us support, our network support is very, very key. And continuous local resource development was also at the center of such collaboration, because the center sustain the need to develop local resources. So there's one local university in Togo, and they have a partner with them, and they were taking their students and they went here for clinical training, and some of the staff from the department were giving lectures at the university as part of their curriculum, just to try and give them the foundation basics of what the therapy is. And we also took some of the medical doctors' testimony and opportunities of the school. So now the center is being dictated 100% by West African workforce and clinical modules, all the way to medical services to the RTCs. And from January 2020, we treated over 700 patients with demands at the center. And the same model was replicated in the entire that is Malawi. So what they did before we ordered the machine, we was what they ordered a machine concept, where the machine is matched to the machine and another size of this group. So it makes the work in terms of commissioning and collection of data easier, because you need to do, and most of the challenge with medical services, some part of Africa has to do with commissioning, or have to do with acceptance testing, measurement of data analysis. Mainly the southern and northern part of Africa, they have a lot of resources. The rest of Africa, they have none at all. Even centers, they have to go and bring other centers from Europe or from Asia to help with commissioning. Then after they need the medical physicists start working. So what we do is when March is here, we have a network of medical physicists across the centers. They have a lead who head medical physicists. There's also a network of engineers who give online support in terms of troubleshooting. We also have access to the vendors and the project manager for each site. So all these things are done. So and every country this project is located, they make sure to train a local person. In terms of medical services, there's a local person who is being trained from the beginning up until when the process starts. So it's also refreshing to say that we go to Togo and Malawi. These medical physicists and staff who have been trained through this collaboration are giving technical and human support even to the government, who is also setting up a second radiotherapy center in the country. So they visited the centers severally, they had discussions with the medical physicists, and they have advised them to the kind of equipment that they can purchase. So if in so doing, that you can see from a private collaboration, now it has extended collaborating even with the government for them to be able to acquire and to run radiotherapy facilities as well. So the aim of this facility, as I said, we want to build and implement oncology center. There's effective network of medical physicists who provide remote support and data analysis. There's a software platform with dedicated and reliable IT support through the use of fiber optics, which is also very key. And most of our protocols are standardized across all the centers, and most of our work is also auto-way. Those have to make the efficiency of our workflow. And there's also support and development of local staff, as I've mentioned earlier. The equipment, because they have a full maintenance contract, is always up and running. The uptime of the machine is very high as compared to when Africa used to buy machines without any contract in terms of maintenance. So with this collaboration, I think it's provided a solution, and we've been able to see that it's been successful because they started this partnership from 2018, and Malawi is the fourth partnership on the continent, and it's been successful. For all the 4 centers are still running. They have local capacities. They train African health professionals. They are managing the place. So we can see that this is working. So if through this online collaboration, it can be extended to other centers. It could be through government, professional bodies, and other stakeholders. These collaborations are actually working. So with the right kind of collaboration, we realize that the radiotherapy center in Africa with this decade will not be as it was the past decade. So yeah, I think in Africa, one thing we also have to see is that it should be more of collaboration rather than competition. We are not competing with each other. Our problems are unique, so we should come up with unique solutions, trying to help each other build up capacity in terms of setting up and running up radiotherapy centers. And now the world is connected by internet, information, IT. It's play an integral role, so we can use that leverage on that to help each other. So if maybe a center in the northern or southern part of Africa have all these resources, they can actually help their neighbors, or some center or a country who doesn't have this. They can use such collaboration to help them to set up their radiotherapy center. So for the resources, I think for FAMPO, or for the African Medical Physicists Group, when I checked on their website, I don't have a lot of information on FAMPO, but I did a bit of reading. I realized that they have a document on accreditation of clinical training, which I went through and I realized it's very key, it's very important. I don't know the implementation of such document, but if it is implemented to the letter, I think it's going to also bring up the level of medical physicists training, especially the clinical training on the African continent, is going to help. And they also have clinical training program for radiotherapy medical physicists, which they had done with the IEA. So FAMPO have adapted this as well as the training program. They have one also for clinical training for RT medical physicists. They have one for postgraduate medical physicists. So these are things that uh, FAMPO is trying to do on the African continent. So all is not lost. I think we have on the right path, and if all these things are done, it's going to work out well. And they've also start to discuss about the mutual recognition of licensing among member countries, which is also a big challenge or a big issue because if we don't have a uniform way of recognition or licensing of medical visits among, so even if one physician is supposed to move to another country to work, most of these countries might not even have many medical physicists organization existing. So then it's either the Ministry of Health or the Medical Council who are supposed to give them license. And many a times it's a very huge challenge. And FAMPO also have committees in charge of scientific professional development and education and training, which is very key as well. So this was the FAMPO documents I was talking about for regional clinical training program. They were trying to come up with a regional training which will be adapted by all countries. So medical physicists from the north or south or east will have the same form of competence or level in terms of their training. So I think it's really good. And for consideration, probably in the
Dr.
future,
George,
if we can establish
you have
a
1 minute.
regional.
1 minute to wrap it up. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm almost done. So if Africa or Afra or FAMPO, in collaboration with other stakeholders, can establish a regional resource training center, if we can have a regional accreditation board, or if we can have a sort of a platform that will help with installation. For me, radiotherapy installation or commissioning, I'm very, very passionate about that because a lot of people have gone through the system but might not be able to do that on their own. And if we can also establish mentorship program in radiotherapy, and if FAMPO can also spearhead the recognition of medical physicists license among member countries, that would be very good. And I also suggest that maybe FAMPO can also coordinate. We have a lot of experienced African medical physicists on the continent who will be able to help other African countries to fill the gap in terms of staff level. Or even if less experienced staff could also be given opportunities to join neighboring centers or countries when they have a new machine for installation. That will also top up in terms of building capacity. So through the network, what we'll be able to achieve, I think is the same. We'll be able to build human resource. We're able to develop RT-based through network. We're able to bridge the gap in terms of the local training, because whenever you have a center coming up, it also helps with the training of the local staff. And in the final, it's going to help deliver quality with the therapy care to our patients when we tend to share resources. So my last slide in conclusion, there is a lot of challenges in meeting the demand of cancer crisis in Africa. So in terms, we know I've listed them already: equipment, maintenance, human resources. But we'll be able to address this issue if we think critically about it, the way Africa go about to just reduce the burden on our continent. We can always talk about innovations in technology and collaborative efforts within the African community itself. We'll be able to identify ways and means for us to eradicate the massive disparity that exists in our country, in our continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. George. Without delay, I want to welcome the second speaker, Dr. Chris. Christy is a good friend of mine, and he's actually currently the president of the Federation of the African Medical Physics Organization. In addition, he also serves on the accreditation board of the IOMP. And he also serves as the assessor for Health Professional Council of South Africa, and he has acted as examiner and convener for College of Medicine in South Africa. He has served as a IAEA subject matter expert in a number of missions, and is currently the head of medical physics division at Tygerberg Hospital in Cape Town, South Africa, and is also an associate professor at Stellenbosch University. He is going to speak on things to consider when specifying a new linear accelerator. Welcome, Chris.
Mahesh, thank you very much for the introduction. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this black sling is not a fashion statement. I tore my bicep tendon, had surgery, so I'm wearing a sling. I don't recommend it. It's not a good idea. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. I have some pictures that I'm showing. It doesn't mean I'm supporting one vendor over the other. It's just example pictures. Why did I choose this topic? Well, it is really relevant. George gave a very succinct overview of the problems we face in Africa. The global cancer burden is predicted to rise tremendously, mostly in countries with a low human development index, which is Africa. This is also from the Dirac database. Dark green is good, light green is bad. Africa is all light green. Maybe size-wise, we just have to remember Africa is bigger than North America by about 6 million square kilometers. It doesn't feature on these maps. But bottom line is there's little radiotherapy going on. If we look at the Lancet Oncology Commission report, they recommend 5,000 additional megavoltage radiotherapy machines in the next 15 years. Look, that's utopian. It equates to one a day over the next 15 years. But the bottom line is we know a lot of linear accelerators will be purchased. We also know from past experience, not many accelerators were not running optimally or are not running optimally. And so I chose to look specifically at what it takes to specify a linear accelerator. Not everything will be relevant everywhere, but some of the things are worth thinking about. You may have to adapt them to your local conditions. And I'm going to start off with this slide. It's the most important one that I have, I think. And if you take home anything, this is the one you've got to take home. Educate the funders, educate the guys who do the decision making, who offer the money, and also make them realize that this is a long-term commitment. If you want a hospital or a radiotherapy service to run, you need three things. You need equipment, you need staffing, and you need consumables. And if any one of those is lacking, it's not going to work. So you can't just buy a Linac and assume everything is sorted. It's a long-term, big money commitment. So if you do hear you get a linear accelerator, this is fantastic news. Usually you're very excited, maybe a little shocked, and immediately it's time to get organized. It's time, well, you will probably realize, okay, I'm in a little over my head, so it's time to get help from someone else who's done it before. And it's time to get started pretty much immediately if you haven't started yet. You can't prepare too much. These specifications, you have to put time into it. And another physicist told me, you get what you deserve. So if you try and put the specifications together the day before the deadline, you will miss stuff and you will get something that is not as good as it should be. And so please take this to heart. Spend a lot of time thinking about the specifications, speaking to other people, not just physicists, other professionals, and start early. Ask for what you want. The worst you can get is no, we can't offer this. If you don't ask, it's already no. Also, you've got to be aware of the budget. So at least in an African setting, a lot of these big ticket items don't necessarily come with hospital budgets, but they get funded through the treasury, who will make a certain amount of money available. So you've got to be very clear of what can I afford. If you have money for a Toyota or a Volkswagen, you won't be able to specify a Lamborghini because you're not going to get it. So be aware of that. And that will also necessarily impact the additional stuff that you can ask for. In our setting, if there's money made available, that usually includes everything. So if I don't specify everything, the rest of the bill will end up coming to the hospital budget, of course, not be particularly happy about it. So I'm going to start off with the bunker. Is it existing bunker or is it a new construction? If it's existing, is the shielding adequate? If you have a cobalt bunker and you're putting in a Linac, is that going to work or not? So the picture I have here, this actually happened to us. The floor plan didn't match what was actually built. And when we measured behind this wall, we had 1 millisievert per hour, and we had to add a bunch of additional shielding blocks because the ISO, or the primary barrier, was not sufficient enough. We hadn't specified this, so this was a hospital problem. So check the floor layout, the position of the ISO center. They're different between the different machines, the width of the primary barriers, adjoining areas, also what's happening above the bunker. We generally put into our specification document that the old LINAC has to be decommissioned and removed by the successful bidder. And think a little about who will pay for room alterations. It may be the hospital, but in many scenarios, the hospital does not have money for room alterations, else they would have done it already. And so you've got to specify them. If you have a new bunker, put together a team to look at the logical workflow in the department to make some design changes. And please find a builder who has experience with concrete. Else you get honeycombing. It's a big mess. It's a major disaster. Please find someone properly to build the bunker. And so just be aware that this could form part of specifications for a LINAC, or it could be a completely separate project. You should at least be aware of this. You should also be aware of, does my LINAC fit into the bunker? So this is actually a design that was given to me at one point that I should please comment on. Turns out the radiographers have to walk like 50 meters to get to the patient. The LINAC for installation couldn't on the corners easily. There was a slope in there. The ceiling was too low. It was really a mess. So look at the bunker, look at what's reasonable, look at which LINACs will fit, if the shielding's adequate, and check whether it must be part of the specifications. In addition, things like joinery, those cupboards where you store the applicators or the masks or whatever, should they form part of the specifications or not? We always include it because the hospital's not going to pay for it afterwards. If you want fancy wall decorations or backlit ceiling images, this is small change compared to a 15-year lifetime of a LINAC. The vendors will be all too happy to add this stuff. But if you don't ask for it, they may not add it afterwards. So just be aware of these little things that can often make a much neater working environment. But you may have to specify them beforehand. So in general, we add a single line, any alterations or additions that are required shall form part of the complete offer. And the vendors don't necessarily particularly like it because it means they have to subcontract a builder or something. But it does mean that we can circumvent a lot of the hospital red tape. And that makes things a lot easier. What else do you need to consider? You have to look at your power supply. Is it adequate? So I've been involved in 2 LINAC installations where we actually had to upgrade the substation. And in one of them, the hospital had to do it, and the other one was actually included in the tender, but the hospital ended up doing it anyway. LINACs don't use a ton of power, but you should at least be aware of it. And in some projects, if your building's sort of on the limit, you're going to have to upgrade the substation. Think about it. You may or may not have to specify it. In South Africa, we have fairly unstable electricity supply. So all our new LINACs come with uninterrupted power supplies, massive battery banks that need an extra room to go into. So we specify that we can finish treating the patient on the bed. But who does this? The engineering, or is it the vendor? And who maintains it? Who will replace the batteries after 3 years? Is it the hospital? Because that will be a very nice chunk of change that they will have to come up with. Or does it become part of the specifications? Do you want the UPS on the LINAC or only on the PCs? And if the PCs, which PCs? This is just something you should think about. You also have to think about air conditioning. Is it vendor supplied or is it hospital supplied? In our hospital, it's almost 50 years old, as is the air conditioning. We generally get the vendors to do this because we don't trust the hospital to actually keep the air conditioning of the area well within the temperature range that it needs to be. And again, who maintains it? Who services the units? In some countries, you may need a dehumidifier. I was at a site in Nigeria where the humidity was so high that the ion chamber in the LINAC short-circuited, and the LINAC was down for months when they were trying to get a replacement. The chiller for the LINAC, who maintains it? Again, this kind of stuff could go into the specifications, may apply to you, it may not apply. You got to think about licensing. Do I need permission from the regulator to import a LINAC? What of this is my job? How much of this is the vendor's job? And what's the time frame for this? So this isn't necessarily going to go into the specification document, but it's something that you should be aware of. So it's not just the LINAC that we're trying to specify. And for the LINAC, I mean, the usual stuff would be beam energies. What photon energies do I want? If I have an existing LINAC, do I want beam matching? What treatment techniques do I want to treat? So for example, if you're going to treat radiosurgery, you need tighter restrictions on the isocenter. If you don't ask for it, you may not get it and you can't demand it afterwards. So this is a good time to sit down with your oncologists and think, what treatment techniques do we want to treat, and specify accordingly. Look at electron energies and applicators. So for our last installation, it turns out we never treated a 25 centimeter electron applicator in 20 years. So we just left it out of the specifications. What dose rates, flattening filter free, that seems to be fairly standard now. You may or may not have to specify a little more around the multi-leaf collimator. We specify the lasers that we want, the positioning lasers. And in particular, we specify the color. We just found that the red laser is not visible as nicely on dark skin. Green or blue is substantially better. So that's what we ask for. Do you want an electronic portal imaging device for image or for positional verification? While you're at it, you might as well include portal dosimetry. May save you by purchasing a diode system if you still find those. Depending on the money, you may want KV imaging and cone beam CT attached to the LINAC. And then think about all the other stuff you want. Image guidance, gating, surface guidance. And this doesn't necessarily only apply to the new LINAC. You will need it on the CT scanner as well. What treatment couch do you want? Just the normal IGRT couch, or do you want the 6D couch? Again, there's a price difference with something you should think of, and all depends very much on the techniques you want to treat. Personal opinion, you don't really need them anymore. I mean, all the dynamic LINACs and the virtual wedges or enhanced dynamic wedges do this just as well. Saves you some commissioning time, saves the RTTs a lot of schlepping. When you specify a LINAC, you got to think a little bit about what's the additional equipment that I need. So you will need a water tank to commission the LINAC. There was a build here in Cape Town, massive LINAC, top-end LINAC, and they just didn't want to spend the additional money for the water tank. So they approached our hospital at the time, can we please borrow yours? We were stupid enough to say yes, and it came back slightly worse for wear, and we had to replace it soon afterwards. But you will need it. If you have a Halcyon, you may have to get a tank that fits the and the LINAC simultaneously. Just something to think about. You may need some software to read this out. If you do VMAT, you need some tool for patient-specific QA. You will have to specify it. It doesn't just come with the LINAC. You will have to think of the ion chambers that you need to do the measurements correctly and use the correct chamber for the correct measurement. If you have electrons, get a Marcus chamber, make sure you get a waterproof cap. I know from personal experience, unfortunately, those things do drown. This is a very silly example into what little detail you may have to go. So we wanted to scan with an electron chamber. We didn't have the holder for the electron chamber, and it was really expensive to buy this from the vendor. It was like $300 at the time. Unfortunately, we had a workshop they could make it, but if you don't have a workshop, this may hinder you. So make sure you get the right tools. This is a good time to look at phantoms. The end-to-end phantom, I would highly recommend it. You can very strongly motivate for why you need this. An electron density phantom, for example. If you don't ask for it, it doesn't automatically come with the LINAC. If you have one, great, but at least think about it. If you do in vivo dosimetry, you will need a diode system. In South Africa, it's required by law. It's becoming more difficult for 2D and 3D cases because you just don't find them anymore. But at least think about it. You will need immobilization devices. Once again, if you buy a LINAC, the vendors will be also happy to supply these. If you afterwards don't have it and you have to get this from the hospital budget, you will raise a lot of eyebrows because these things are expensive. When you specify, ask for 2 sets because you want one on the CT scanner and one on the LINAC. You don't want your RTTs to have to walk around the division with these things tucked under their arms. They will thank you. There's other equipment you may need. Chromic film, for example. In our hospital procurement system, it can take literally months to get this. So when you get a LINAC, ask for a box of chromic film. What are they going to say? No? Of course they will give it to you. Think of the electron density phantoms. Think of solid water slabs for quick reference checks. What water tanks do you need? What equipment you need for patient-specific QA? What QC equipment you need? You could add a high precision spirit level, and then you will need a calibrated ion chamber for absolute dosimetry. Make sure you have the right extension cables, the right connectors. Get a barometer and thermometer while you're at it. You may need a check source to check the accuracy of your ion chamber. You may even go down to, I want chairs controlled because my chairs are 20 years old and the wheels are falling off. If you don't ask for it, you're not necessarily going to get it. So put it in the tender or in the bid document, and maybe it gets kicked out, maybe not. Think about a survey meter and neutron detector. If you don't have one, before acceptance testing starts, you want to check the safety and security of the premises. You will need a calibrated survey meter and potentially a neutron detector. Just something to bear in mind. Of course, we've got to look at software and licenses as well. How many record and verify workstations, how many contouring workstations, how many calculation workstations, what other functionalities do you want? For example, deformable image registration may require third-party software. And I just found it's good to assume that everything that you want is a license that needs to be purchased, because it probably is. But this means you have to get in touch with the vendors beforehand to figure out what functionalities they have. What else can trip you up? An internet line. I never thought of this until we needed one and we couldn't get it through the hospital because the IT policies were so strict. So for the last tender, we actually specified the vendor must supply this and must pay the line rental. Network switches, very unexpected cost if you don't know this. Does the hospital supply these or the vendor? You can specify this. What level of integration is required? Do you want this to speak to your PACS or your hospital information system or not? Backup solutions. Don't assume you're going to get it. Specify it. Stay away from tape drives. They're stupid. Get a network-attached storage or cloud storage or something. I mean, this is all stuff that when I wrote stuff, I tripped over this. And this may help you to not do the same mistakes. Please don't assume. Assume makes an ass of you and me and probably costs the hospital a lot of money. So specify whatever you want. Look at the training. Look at what training is offered by the vendors and what training you would like that's relevant. Specify it, else you may not get it. And please add full costs of training, accommodation, and travel, because else they will offer you free training, but tell you you have to get there and pay for it yourself. And again, that may or may not happen. Look at a service agreement and a maintenance contract with uptime. Think of stuff like how long until service staff arrive. Are expensive parts included, like, a beam center line in this image here that broke during a warranty period? Are there local parts? What about hardware and software upgrades? Are local engineers trained? How comprehensive must this be? That depends on your local situation. Make sure you get a warranty. And I mean, in our context, I definitely recommend a fully comprehensive maintenance contract. This is a publication where they compared 3 LINACs. Nigeria had no contract, Botswana had a fully comprehensive contract, and the UK was parts only. And if you look at the downtimes bottom left, then the UK and Botswana were around 1 or 1.5%, and Nigeria, without any contract, the downtimes were up to 50%. You're spending a lot of money for massive downtimes if you don't add this into your thinking beforehand. May not be relevant in your scenario, but at least think about it. So, in a nutshell, there are a ton of things to consider when purchasing a linear accelerator. Please don't do this the night before. Think about what you need. Speak to, get input from other team members. For example, in our setting, the service contract goes through clinical engineering, but the electrical supply goes through hospital engineering. So you've got to come up with the technical specifications and then trust the rest of the team to come up with the regulatory or the framework, the other regulatory stuff that's required, for example. If you do this right, it may save lives. It may save the hospital a lot of money afterwards. It will probably make your radiotherapy safer if you can work with all the equipment that you wanted, and you don't say, well, I can't check this because I'm missing XYZ. It is a team effort. Get input from other professions as well. The oncologists may give good advice when it comes to the treatment techniques. The RTTs, definitely when it comes to workflow issues, they can offer valuable insight. Get the hospital and clinical engineering teams on board. Make sure you have open communication lines, and you may end up with a fantastic unit. So in a nutshell, what to think of when you specify a linear accelerator. It may not be a comprehensive list, but it's as comprehensive as I've come up with in my 20-year career so far. That's it. Oh, and you get to make electron trees with the old LINAC that you kick out. Highly recommend it. That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
That's it from me.
It was a wonderful, nice tips, very essential tips for anyone. It doesn't matter whether it's in Africa or in any other part of the world. The pointers which you mentioned are very essential. Sometimes we have to overlook. There are a number of questions. I'm going to direct some questions, and one of you, I'll start with George, and you can fill up if you need to add up anyone because you're also the president of the FAMP. So one of the question is asking, this is directly to you, Chris. This person asking, is that enough if medical physicists learn during LINAC installation and commission in their institution from the vendors, service engineer and application specialist? Is that training enough?
So the quick answer here is probably not. I mean, if you're a medical physicist, if you studied physics, chances are you're a curious personality, so you want to know more to start off with. So definitely I recommend be there during the LINAC installation, be there during acceptance testing and commissioning. You get to load the machine, but that's not where it should stop. Hopefully the learning started way before that and will continue way after that. The application specialist is there to show you how to push the buttons, where the buttons are, what to push. But that doesn't necessarily make you a good operator. So definitely there's a lot more to it than just joining in when they're busy commissioning, I think.
Yeah, no, that's very true, because that's not enough. Just from the vendor itself, we need more training. George, I have a question for you. The question is, you mentioned about PACT and Ray of Hope program of IAEA. How is it helped? How is it has helped in changing the situation in facility? And my other question is, how many ICTP trained medical physicists from Africa are now back working in Africa itself? Do you know approximately?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I had a bit of internet problem, but I think I got your question. The second question was how many trained medical physicists from the ICT program are back working in Africa. So I think in Togo, let me just say what I know from my personal experience. So the center I work now with in Malawi, the local physicist is a graduate from the ICTP training in Trest. He is the local physicist I'm training to take over from the Malawi center. And there is another project. The government is also building a radiotherapy center. He's also a graduate from the ICTP training. And back in Lome, the physicists who also came for training our center that I can talk of. But
that's very helpful.
For the rest, maybe I might not know. And in Ghana, I know also 2 medical physicists who went to ICTP who came training, actually working, and most of them come back. So these are the ones that I know. And with the risk of hope from IEA, I think for this month, it's more of like high level in terms of how to go about purchasing and even trading. And I think if you look in the past, where IEA have been able to help member states to come up with radiotherapy or to establish.
Chris, do you want to add anything to this?
I agree. Most ICTP graduates come back to Africa. Not all of them have jobs immediately. I know some are struggling with registration with the Health Professions Council. So there are hiccups among there, but I do think most have actually come back and are trying to make a difference. I don't have the exact numbers though.
That's fine. I think that's good to know. One question was, yesterday somebody asked in the Middle Eastern, focused on Middle East medical physics activities. The question is, what is the recognition of medical physicists as a distinct field? So the question is, in Africa, do we have any, like a requirement of medical physicists, like in radiation therapy or in imaging? So in general, is it in the books? Chris?
So I think only 6 countries in Africa actually require registration to practice as medical physicists. So this is a major shortcoming. Some countries are working on it and actually coming up with reasonable solutions. But it's a slow process that hinges on a lot of things because chances are you require a national society or a national association to liaise with the Health Professions Council. And then you have to educate them what it takes to do this. And then all those rules have to be promulgated. So it's a process that takes a long time. From FAMPO, what we've attempted to do is, so ideally we want registration in each country. But we also know that's not going to happen very quickly. So we started a process of registering medical physicists with FAMPO.
Okay.
We have our education and training committee that the plan is that they accredit educational institutions and residencies, and then that the physicists who come from there, that they get registered as physicists with the Professional Development Committee. So at this point, we've only registered ICTP graduates, but hopefully we'll be able to expand that. It is a big problem in Africa, the registration of physicists, coupled with usually fairly poor salaries and a lot of red tape in the hospital administration.
And I believe this is the first level is applied to radiation therapy. Then that situation is even more dire for the diagnostic physicist. Am I correct?
Yes. So usually therapy is regulated the most. If something goes wrong, on average in therapy, it goes wrong the worst. You could argue interventional radiology also has its fair share of problems. But usually therapy is where the regulations are, and that's where the physicists get appointed. In imaging, in nuclear medicine, that's the next one, because radionuclides, so you need someone who's responsible on that authority. but radiology is lagging in most countries. It's lagging tremendously. It's a real shame.
So one other question I have is like, I know in Africa, there's a lot of need for resources, but I also see a lot of private companies and hospital opening in big cities. How does that bring in challenges for medical physicists working in a private hospital versus government hospital or something like that? Either one of you can address that one, just your opinion.
Well, I think the more the merrier.
Okay.
Private hospital that starts up and they appoint physicists, all that happens is it creates job opportunities, it creates opportunities for networks and collaborations, it creates opportunities for, for cross-checking, say dosimetric cross-checking once a year or something. So I'm all for it.
So one other question I have is like, it was mentioned that IOMP, Education Training Committee, and also Accreditation Board can certainly help in clinical training program in Africa. If they receive a request, they can help you. I know Chris is involved with the Accreditation Board, so that is one aspect. The other one mentioned was one of the question is like, as of right now, IOMP, AAPM, and Medical Physicists Without Borders, they're all trying to establish mentoring process. But the question then comes like, there are who is going to fund these mentoring if somebody want to participate as a mentor in this program, where does the resource or funds comes from? George, you want to start with, and then Chris can
No, I think let me allow my former president to take this question because he have a lot of knowledge and experience with that.
So this is always a problem in Africa. One of them. One is large distances, and the second one is who pays for it. So we are actually very fortunate that we live in the internet age, and a lot of stuff can happen virtually, like this talk. And so there's space for like a mentor-mentee relationship to build through, online meetings similar to this. It doesn't just happen. It takes a conscious efforts on both parts to actually make it happen. And that probably means that a lot of those attempts actually fail very early on. But there'll be, every now and again, you'll come across somewhere where, where this relationship just works and where actually a mentor who's outside of Africa can actually have a significant impact in Africa just by being there for questions and having an open ear. So there's definitely room for that, but the implementation will always be probably inadequate.
And I think, let me add to what Chris said. So as he said, during the time of purchase of an equipment, you can also require from your vendor if they can pay for training in terms of physical training. So I had a couple of medical physicists from Nigeria who came over to the center in Lome for training, and it was paid by the vendor because it was part of the contract. They needed clinical exposure and experience, so that was taken care of. And after, we keep in touch remotely in terms of further training, and if they have any problem, we can resolve online. But for them, they came over, it was fully funded by the vendor, which was part of their contract.
Wearing my other hat as on the leadership of the AAPM, we have an international council, and we are trying to do some establishing mentorship program one-on-one. And we also doing some need assessment surveys now to see how AAPM can help in this venture. I just want to let you know. But the other question is like, this is a question to Chris. Can you please inform about AI-based radiotherapy? Can Tomo do adaptive radiation therapy on a daily basis? So let's start with the first question, AI-based radiotherapy. I know you are working with...
So I can't particularly answer the second question. There's no tomotherapy in South Africa.
Okay.
I do think that the use of artificial intelligence in radiation therapy in Africa has the potential to save millions of lives. There are some fantastic projects going. I'm thinking particularly of Lawrence Court's radiation planning assistant from MD Anderson. It's a free tool where you can upload the CT scans. It does the contouring, it even does the planning, and all it remains with the optimized thing and check, but has the potential to actually reduce some of the human resources required to do radiotherapy right now. So I do think there's a major window of research that can happen and that will actually end up saving lives, many, many lives. So I'm a huge fan of it.
Good. The other thing which you mentioned, I think George mentioned, is 50% of all the radiation therapy units sources are in Egypt and South Africa. So rest of the countries distributed. So are there any plans of creating like centers within Africa and different location, which can then serve multiple countries as like a hub and spokes model? One of you, start with George, and Chris can also answer this.
Yeah,
George.
so I think as part of my presentation, I was thinking more of like a collaborative partnership because we have a lot of expertise in the north and the southern part of Africa, especially in South Africa. So in as much as the rest of Africa is in dire need of expertise or people to help, I think it would be very good if FAMPO and other key stakeholders in Africa can take that supported remotely or whether going there or helping them to set up. I think that's something that will benefit radiotherapy in Africa very much. Yeah.
Chris, any comment?
I think in theory, it's a great idea. In practice, the devil's in the detail. So it's not necessarily straightforward for someone who's, for example, you're registered in the US. If you want to practice in South Africa, you couldn't. Because in South Africa, you qualify as therapy, nuclear medicine, radiology in one. If you only have one of those, you can't register with the Health Professions Council. So there's regulatory frameworks like that potentially stand in the way of making something like this work, with exceptions. Like the East African community is reasonably homogeneous, so it might work to have like a regional designated center somewhere there. There's scope to look at it, but again, when you have to treat patients and they have to come from a different country to actually get treated and then have to find accommodation for 6 weeks and everything that goes with it, it becomes a very expensive thing. And unfortunately, then not really affordable to many, many Africans who already, as it is, have accessibility problems.
So one of the question was students trained in by ICTP are coming back, but the real problem is the recognition, mainly in French-speaking countries. And just want to share that comment from one of the person attending. So can I ask a general question? All these situations, how can international bodies such as IOMP or IAEA and WHO, not in the broadest and help in overall helping with respect to recognition of medical physicists and reducing some of these the roadblock of this regulation, everything. So do you have any requests in the sense, Chris or George?
Well, this is a difficult one to answer because, I mean, if you're looking at setting up an academic program, you suddenly have all the university red tape. If you set up a clinical program, you have all the Health Professions Council red tape and the accreditation of that program and all that. And so it's very easy to say, okay, we will do this. And the easiest bit is probably to come up with the syllabus to actually, to say this is what we want to offer. The actual implementation of this is very often, that is a process that takes many years and people lose heart or find a job elsewhere. So I must say the International Atomic Energy Agency has done tremendous work over decades now in Africa. They've offered fellowships to African physicists to train at other facilities to hopefully go back home and help, work in those radiotherapy facilities. It hasn't always worked out that way. It was often used as a tool to actually find greener pastures. But I mean, the IAEA documents on academic clinical training programs, on the requirements, on how to set up a therapy facility, on how to use a cyclotron facility. It's all there and it's free to use. So a lot of those resources are around, and that's fantastic. If you look in particular, how can we help? I mean, a lot of it boils down to having teaching webinars, or having like the Africa Oncology Network that has weekly or monthly meetings on case studies and all that. That's somewhat successful, but I have yet to find the recipe where I can say, okay, this worked, this was great.
Yeah, so basically you need multiple prongs approach, and each one will contribute a bit at a piece. And so I'm hoping IOMP is doing the same thing, trying to do the same thing, like webinars. We can do a little bit more of online training and other things. But IOMP, I'm very happy, proud to be part of the IOMP, because we are trying to reach out what we can do with the local, like such as PAMPO or RA together, what we can come to do together to pull together our resources. Our president, John Damlakis, has a comment. Please go ahead, John.
Mahesh, yes, since we are all here, first of all, warm greetings to all African medical physicists. This week we celebrate their contributions, our contributions to patient care. So happy IMPW, everyone. Presentations were excellent. Participation was great. And thank you, Mahesh, for coordinating this great webinar. Regarding IOMP and IOMP's support, we collaborate with international organizations and agencies such as the IAEA, WHO, of course, with regional organizations, FAMPO, to facilitate the exchange of knowledge and resources. So through our various committees, we support the establishment of curricula. For example, through the Education Training Committee, we provide guidance on best practices. We help set competency standards, and like to emphasize the existence of endorsement and sponsorship. We endorse educational events. We sponsor education and training events. It has already been mentioned, the accreditation board and services provided to accredit courses. We organized two big conferences, the international conference and the world conference. So these are also important events and opportunities for colleagues to participate and train, to get some training. IMPCB also regarding the crucial and hot topic of certification. IMPCB facilitates the recognition of medical phases. Of course, we cannot solve all problems. We can only, well, we can address some issues, but I fully understand that there is a lot of room for improvement. A few words, final words about mentorships. So ICRP, as you know, Mahesh, as you and I know, as members of ICRP Committee 3, ICRP provides opportunities. There are mentors and mentees. So for those interested, please visit ICRP's website. Once again, there are opportunities if you are interested in mentorships. So again, happy IMPW, everyone. Thank you, Magdalena, for your support. Thank you, Mahesh. Thank you, Chris and George, for your excellent presentations. And of course, our audience.
So before we wrap up, I just want to tell all the attendees that This webinar recording will be available within 28 to 48 hours on our website, IOMP website. So please, notification will be provided automatically those who attended. And I also want to thank, behind the screen is Dr. Magdalena Stoa, who is the main facilitator of these webinars. She does take care of all the logistics, so smooth, make it life so easy. Before I want to end, I just also want to thank for this, for both of you giving an excellent overview and speaking on this topic. I have enjoyed my a couple of visits to Africa through IAEA. That's where I met Chris in Lusaka. Then I had a chance to go to South Africa. What, in spite of all the need, I'm very hopeful things will get better across the African continent. I think all of us are very much interested to see whatever little bit we can do. And I remember seeing Desmond Tutu's famous statement saying like, we need to do a little bit of each of us have to do a little bit, and over together it'll add up together. So I think that's where I would like to end this webinar. Thank you once again for this excellent webinar. And thank you also for all these more than 750 participants in today's webinar. And of course, it will be available on the IOMP website soon. Thank you. I'd like to close it.
Thank you.
Please join tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.